Stakeholders. Remember the Boeing 777 case? It was successful in part because the engineering was good, but primarily because the stakeholder engagement was fantastic. Airlines were their principal stakeholders. Boeing co-created the 777 with 9 major airlines, and Boeing worked with stakeholders early and often, even before the design phase started. And Boeing didn't just engage airline stakeholders, they also engaged a variety of their own internal teams, suppliers and subcontractors, government and regulatory bodies, airports and ground service, and unions and worker groups. Now, do you need, as a project manager, do you need to pay equal attention to all of these stakeholders all the time? Let's take a look at this stakeholder influence grid. This is a 2x2 matrix, 4 quadrants. It's a tool to help project managers know how to best engage stakeholders. So it goes from low to high power on one axis, which tells you how much authority, control, or influence a stakeholder has. And it goes from low to high interest on the other axis, which tells you how much a stakeholder cares about the project's success. This is a starting place for tailoring stakeholder communication. Starting with high power and high interest, these stakeholders are called key players. They are the most important stakeholders to keep happy. You want to update them frequently. You want to know what their interests are so that your communication is personalized. These stakeholders are decision makers, so you have to plan and schedule decision-making moments with them, not just updates. And escalation pathways. Escalation means to formally raise a problem or risk by appealing to someone with more authority or resources, because otherwise the problem won't be resolved. These are those people. The gatekeepers are also high power but are low interest. They don't need to be too involved, but they should be given periodic updates. The observers are both low power and low interest, so they're essentially low priority. But stakeholders can switch quadrants over the course of a project, so monitor observers. They may move to another quadrant where their influence changes. Operational support is low power but high interest. This is an important group. They need regular updates, but importantly, they need to be offered ways to provide their feedback for what they envision as a successful project and for how their experience can contribute to the project's success. This stakeholder group can become champions of the project, or they can create problems for the project. So let's think about Boeing now. Where would you place the airlines? They automatically have power because they are the buyers of Boeing. If Boeing makes something that no one wants to buy, that's disastrous. And they have interest. Airlines have a direct financial and operational stake in the project's success. They want a plane that could fill a very particular role, and that plane did not already exist at that time. So the airlines were key players. Airports and ground service. Airports are high power. They control runway lengths, gate configurations, taxiway widths, terminal compatibility, etc. Boeing has to conform to all major airports, not the other way around. But airports are low interest. They don't care what planes Boeing is making. Ground service is the opposite, low power and high interest. They have no control over anything on the Boeing 777, but the safety of the ground crew and the efficiency of their workflow depends on how the airplane is designed. Now, where would you place all of Boeing's internal teams? And should they all go in the same quadrant? Engineers were critical to pulling off the design. They influenced every technical decision, and they were deeply involved from the start to the finish. So they had lots of power and lots of interest. So the engineering department was a key player. Design depended on what engineering and marketing said, so they didn't have much power, but they were deeply interested in the outcomes and they were engaged early on in the design, so they were operational support. Manufacturing has a lot of power and they control production and design. They also had a lot of interest, especially in the manufacturing process, so manufacturing was a key player. Marketing and sales, at first they have low power and low interest, but as the aircraft approaches going to market, the client engagement intensifies, their power rises significantly, as does their interest. So marketing and sales start off as observers and move on to becoming key players. So again, stakeholders can bounce around quadrants over the course of the project. Financial planning. They control budgets, so they have a very high level of influence throughout the entire life cycle of the project, and they're interested, so they're key players. Now, sometimes there is tension between stakeholders. For example, the engineers may say they need some new composite material for better performance. Then the financial people come in and say, yeah, but how are you going to pay for that? And the engineers say, hey, we also want some redundancy. So redundancy, that's like the backup systems or backup components that take over if the primary system or primary component fails, which we all want redundancy as passengers. But the curmudgeonly financial folks, they only say, hey, it costs too much. By the way, they would never say that. Airplanes need redundancy. So, do you just get some popcorn, sit down, and watch them fight it out and see who's left standing? That could be fun. Or you could ask some questions. Here's some considerations for how to resolve conflict. You can ask, what's most critical to the project's success? Is it innovation? Is it speed, cost savings, customer satisfaction? How does your decision impact project risk? If it saves money but increases all kinds of risks, is it really worth the savings? You could do a risk-adjusted cost-benefit analysis. Explore alternatives and trade-offs. Is there a compromise that both parties can agree with? Can engineering find something less costly but still innovative? Can finance pull money from other parts of the budget? And finally, appeal to authority. This is escalation and it needs to follow chain of command. You can see if senior executives or the steering committee have a strong opinion on the matter. All right, now where would you place the unions and workers? Typically, these are low power but high interest stakeholders. They should be interested. Their jobs, their schedules, their work conditions are going to be affected by the project. And they themselves can be the source of a wealth of information. They often are able to bring up practical problems like this component doesn't fit well. And those insights that only frontline workers have the day in and day out experience with can affect a great deal of time, cost, and quality. The assembly line workers at Boeing provided Boeing with a wealth of information on how to lay out the factory floor, how to arrange assembly line flow, how to design the tools that were going to be used for building the 777. They told Boeing which were the best fasteners and where on the factory floor fasteners should be located. Remember that door that flew off the Boeing recently? Airplanes have millions of fasteners, bolts and nuts, screws and rivets, pins and clamps. So never forget the operational stakeholder. And their unions might also be interested. Changes brought about by the project must be negotiated with unions. Project managers must be aware of collective bargaining agreements, and the power dynamic can shift when a union goes into action, whether it's a regular contract negotiation or if they decide to go on strike. So the seemingly low power group can suddenly have a great deal of influence on the project. Now that you know who they are and what they want, how do you manage them so the project succeeds? A large part of project management is just being a cheerleader for the project team. And a large part of that is communicating with stakeholders the way they want to be communicated with. So create a deliberate plan for engaging stakeholders. Think about how often you want to communicate with them, what kind of messaging they receive, what role they play in decisions, what strategy is needed to increase support and decrease resistance. Stakeholder strategy is ongoing, so you should have a pulse on your stakeholders throughout the project. And communication with stakeholders is a primary deterrent from sabotage or someone creating problems for you and the project. So yes, stakeholders can become difficult, and it's worth mentioning that difficult stakeholders are not difficult because of animosity or some sort of beef. It's just that we're all going to act on the incentive structure before us, or whatever biases or heuristics are influencing us at the moment, or preconceived ideas about what the project will do to us. So it's fine. Difficult stakeholders are not bad people. So you have to figure out ways to get them supportive. And the best ways are usually ways that show that you are supportive of them. Have conversations. But if you need to, then you might need to escalate, take concerns to higher ups, making sure to follow the proper channels, and go through all the documentation and document your contentious conversations, and have stakeholders sign off on decisions that make changes to the project. All right, this is the RASCI matrix. This is a responsibility assignment matrix. It should reduce confusion by documenting which stakeholder is doing what and how they're all involved. It stands for responsible, accountable, support, consulted, and informed. The individual or department the responsible party is the individual or department who will complete the task or deliverable. And it's best to keep this to one person, otherwise no one will do it. So for example, if you have a task where 100 phone calls need to be made to 100 different people, and you have a list, and you think it'll take two people to do it in the amount of time you need it done, then break the list up into 50 people, the first 50 people and the last 50 people, and assign one person to each of those two lists. So accountable, the person who is answerable, they have to make sure that the responsible person completes the task, and there should ideally only be one accountable person per task. Support, these people are enablers. They will provide you with whatever help or resources that are necessary for the responsible person, but you don't have to go to them. It's not required that you seek any of their input. Consulted, these are people with subject matter expertise, and you are required to consult with them before certain types of work or certain decisions can be made. You have to actively seek their input. And informed, these are people that just need to be updated on the progress, but they don't really contribute directly. And so what one-way communication means is just you give them an update, like an email or a newsletter or something like that. Two-way communication is when you sit down face-to-face or, over a Zoom call. You're both communicating simultaneously to each other. So this is the traditional format for a RACI. These column headers have people's names or roles, and then the cells across from each task, you put the RASCI, whichever is appropriate. You put those letters in the cells. In this format, it's easy to see by each person or each stakeholder how they contribute across multiple tasks. You can also flip it. So this format is good if you want to see everyone who is doing a particular, like consulting, is consulted for a particular task. And then everybody will all be in the same cell block, and you can see everybody at once. So go forth and identify your stakeholders. Who cares about this project? Who is critical to the project's successful execution? Who can cause delays or setbacks? And who can influence the opinions of others? All right, thank you.